Okay, well, there are a couple of reasons there specifically. The first one is that I lived in Asia, specifically in China, for about 5 years in Beijing. So I took an interest on the culture and the do's and don'ts of China, basically. So that was in the late 1990s. So from then on, I remained quite interested about Chinese culture. I have kept on reading about life in the new China, etc., over the last 2 decades. That was the first reason that I wanted to portray a film about Chinese immigration. But the second reason is that over the last, let's say, 12, 13 years, we saw an influx of immigrants into Latin America. I spent a lot of time in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where I work in film as well, doing post-production. And over the years, I saw how, for example, all the corner shops were began to be managed or owned by Chinese nationals. And all of a sudden, years after, you stopped saying, I'm going to the supermarket, and you said, I'm going to the Chinese. Basically in Spanish. And the same phenomenon I started seeing in other Latin American cities and in Guayaquil, where the film was shot specifically. In 2008, the government back then opened the borders completely, and there was no visa requirement to come to Ecuador. So there was about 18, 20,000 Chinese that came over that year, and they settled down in Guayaquil. A lot of them, I noticed, they start using Ecuador as a transit point to other destinations, either to the southern hemisphere or to the northern hemisphere, to United States, basically. And it was not only Chinese nationals, but nationals from many other countries in Asia, like Pakistan, Nepal, India, Afghanistan, etc., or even Africa as well. So a lot of them settled down in Guayaquil, and then I started seeing that this phenomenon was really happening all over the world, not just in Latin America, but in European cities as well, in Madrid, in Milan, in Valencia, etc. So I thought it was very interesting to take a look at immigration of a community that has not been seen, has not been, nobody has taken interest really, mostly in film around the world, and certainly not in Latin America. So that was the two reasons that I thought it was necessary, let's say, to take a view on this immigration, on this community. Okay, well, I began to basically, since 2014, I began to, I live in Quito, I don't live in Guayaquil, I live in the capital. So I start traveling a lot to Guayaquil and starting to walk in what is called the Chinatown of Guayaquil, and start to understand their ways of life, what they were trades, what they were their main businesses, how they kept to themselves, and start to research about the community, the Chinese community in Ecuador. And although there's since 2008, there's a larger group of immigrants. The Chinese immigration to Ecuador, it goes back about 120 years, long time ago, to Guayaquil. And they established since 1908 the first association of Chinese immigrants in Guayaquil. So imagine 110 years ago. They established the first community, and there were being waves of immigrants over the years. They have always kept to themselves. It's always been a tight community, basically, but they have settled strongly in Ecuador, economic roots, social roots, artistic roots, etc., that they have left quite a positive impact in the city of Guayaquil. So that's how I began to get into the community. I approached this old society, and in 2016, I decided to make a small documentary, let's say, but something very small as a means to get into the community, I documented the celebration of Chinese New Year's in 2016. So that was quite interesting because I went in the 3, 4, 5 days that they celebrated. I was invited to about 4 or 5 celebrations, you know, big celebrations, big cocktails, big banquets in big restaurants, etc. So in one of them, it was the anecdote goes that, you know, as a tradition, the Chinese, they usually during Chinese New Year, they give out some money in envelopes. You know, you take like sweepstakes, I guess you call it sweepstakes. So we were sitting, the crew there, we were only 3 or 4 of us sitting in a table with 500 people, and it happens that we were chosen or we were selected or by luck to get this award. To this like $200-300 in an envelope. So that make us go. They call us up to the stage, you know, to take the envelope and to say thank you. So that's how we were presented really in public, because when they call us to the stage, they say, well, these are these people and they are making a film about Chinese community in Guayaquil. So everybody saw us. Basically, we were presented completely in community there. And from then on, we were able to walk more freely. I mean, to walk more at ease and to approach the shops, to approach the people in the Chinatown. And that's how the casting process also began. So we were able to put flyers in the shops, in the restaurants, calling for casting, etc. And everybody actually was excited, you know, about this movie that they're making about our community, etc. So, and they opened up, and the whole process was very positive, very satisfactory, really. And that's how the casting came about. Yes, absolutely. Well, on the first question, I began to write the script about 8 years ago, long time ago, and by the time I began to do this small documentary, which was basically a small registration of the celebration of the Chinese New Year, I already had the script. I already had some of the funds in place. I actually, in 2014, the project won Best project in the Beijing Film Festival Pitch Forum. So the project was already way into its development. And the way that I entered the Chinese community, for me, was the decision I wanted to work with real characters, with real immigrants. And obviously you need the whole community to be part of it. So that's why I decided to approach the community through this small documentary. So yeah, that was in place already. Absolutely. And then as far as the dark side of the community, I guess there are a couple of things there, you know, on the film that I take on a few of the contemporary issues that I see in China, you know, as why people migrate, for example. It is not for economic reasons in many cases, but it's for existential reasons. You know, when I was going back to China in 2014, 15, 16, I went a lot to China, like 10 times over those years. I was interviewing women, just like the character of Lei, you know, and I was sort of asking them, you know, what are their anxieties, what are their dreams, what they wanted to, and a lot of them expressed, you know, to being part of a chauvinistic society was a lot of pressure for them, you know, a male-driven society for successful women was a lot of weight on them, and a lot of them migrate for existential reasons. You know, for example, the pressure of the new China. You know, the work of the new China was very strong. You know, in a city like Beijing, I saw some people that were really frustrated just because of back then. You know, I guess now it's better, the pollution. Something as simple, but it's not so simple as the pollution. You know, they didn't want to raise their kids in an environment so polluted. I guess now it changed. So a lot of these reasons, they wanted to be more free to live in a world, in a space that it was not so crowded, I guess. So all these were reasons that, in a way, I put on the film. And then there are the traditional, let's say, darker, illegal activities that, like all communities do in the world, you know, there's always, all communities have the mafia, let's say, you know, and there's always the illegal trade of people. absolutely. And usually the illegal trade of people is handled by the same community, by participants in the same community, unfortunately. So, and that's it goes back to 100 years or whatever, you know, in all the countries in the world. As far as Chinese community, they have the dark side that take on gambling, human trafficking, drugs, or extortion, whatever, you know, just like pretty much any community of immigrants in the world. So, and then the film is based on inspired on real stories, you know, that has been taken over the years. I don't know, I think at 2014, 13, there was an issue on the news about how they were getting illegal visas to passports to in order to immigrate to United States. Just up until I remember 2018, I think it was. So you could see that there were people caught in Colombia, for example, on boats, you know, families trying to get into United States by ocean, which is the normal way that Cubans, Africans, and many other, or Latin Americans, even Ecuadorians themselves, they try to migrate and get to Mexico and then cross illegally the border. So all those elements are there, have been there. There have been stories of extortion on the news in Guayaquil, things like this, you know. So I took on all those real stories. Okay, the cast itself, like I said, I began during those celebrations. I began the official process of casting. It took about 6 months. The backgrounds of each of the three of the characters quite interesting. In the case of Lei, for example, she went to university in China, in Xi'an. She graduated from Chinese language, and she applied to go with the Confucius Institute abroad. She wanted to go to Chile, actually, but she was given Ecuador as a destination offer to teach at the Chinese Institute. By the time that I did casting with her, she already passed that. She had gotten married with an Ecuadorian, and she was teaching, or she's still teaching Chinese at the university. She's the leading teacher of Mandarin language at a very good university in Guayaquil. So she had heard from another friend about these postings that we were putting on the walls. And she's a very interesting woman. She's very smart, really, really smart. And she thought of something, an extra activity that she could do. She always obviously liked cinema, and she thought of it as a challenge. So, you know, I did casting with many different immigrants. But she was the one selected because all the ability that she had, you know, to perform. And then in the case of Wong, for example, he's very interesting because he left China at the age of 12 years old to go to Sicily, to Italy. So he spent there 2-3 years in Sicily, and then he moved to Spain, to Alicante, Spain, and he stayed there until he was around 20 years old. So his adolescence or his bringing was somehow Western already. But then at the age of 20, he went back to China, and he lived in China for the next 10 or 12 years. His father decided to migrate from Spain to Ecuador and open a little restaurant, a very little restaurant in the Chinatown. And for example, in the case of Wong, himself, he didn't want to stay any longer in China. He had done well with business at some point, and then he told me he basically went bankrupt. He did some no good business eventually, and he decided to come to Ecuador also to help his father and somehow to stay away from the pressure of the big China. And he mentioned, for example, the pollution, etc. And so again, he was working with his father in the small restaurant. And right next to it, about 2 blocks from it, is the University of the Arts. And the film school there, the students have been shooting, because they have such proximity to Chinatown, they have decided some of the students to try to make a short film about Chinese, with Chinese characters. So they have already interviewed him, and he spoke Spanish very well because he lived in Spain, and he knew how to relate the ideas of myself, of the film crew, to the other Chinese nationals, because his mind in a way was more open, let's say, you know, and he was very well connected with the Chinese community. So again, when he started helping us initially to approach the Chinese community in Guayaquil, and I noticed that how dynamic was himself, so I thought he could represent the character of Wong. I don't think it's the best performance, but anyway, he did it, and I was happy, you know, to work with him. Very nice guy. And then the bad guy, the Chang, he's another very interesting story, because he's from Taiwan originally, and he's a complete gentleman himself. You know, he migrated about 35 years ago to Buenos Aires, to Argentina. He lived there for 20 or more years. He has kids. He has grown-up kids that live in Buenos Aires. And then he migrated as a businessman to Panama. He stayed a few years in Panama. Then he went to Mexico for a shorter time. And he ended up in Guayaquil, where he works as a miner. He's a boss in mining gold. By the time I did the casting, he was getting the permits to the new mine. And of course, that takes years. I mean, actually, he just told me, I think in January, that he finally got the new permit for the new mine after like 3 years of dealing with the government because anti-environmental issues and all these things. So he at the time he was living in Guayaquil, and he was doing, you can say he's well off somehow. And as a hobby, he was working with shoes, making artisan shoes, like artistic shoes, just as a hobby. And then he has been working at the restaurant that he went to eat all the time. He saw the casting, the calling for the casting in a big poster on the wall. So again, he thought, well, I'm not doing anything. Why not give it a try? And he came to the casting. And again, he's a completely gentleman. I think he does an excellent job, an absolutely excellent job in the film, you know, as a first-time actor. And all of them very precise, very studious, very perseverant, very concentrated, completely committed to the film, you know. So we did rehearsals for about 3.5 months, you know, 8-10 hours per day. We watched many films of Wong Kar-wai, many things, you know. So very dedicated people, very excited to work on the film, and then you have all the extras. So that's the story of the characters. I think it's individually is a very interesting story of each one of them. Well, yes, I was, yes, I do speak Mandarin. Of course, over the years, forgotten a lot. So when I shot the film, I had to reincorporate a lot of the Mandarin into myself. And I communicated either in English, Spanish, or Mandarin. For example, with Wong in Spanish, with Lei in English, speaks very good English, in Mandarin with the other characters. So it was in all the languages, basically. And as far as the shooting was, it was something interesting or funny in a way, because the whole crew didn't understand anything. So except for I had a script, how you say, the person that does the script of the film, I had one in Spanish and one in Mandarin. That was the only person that spoke Mandarin, the whole crew. So the whole crew, the first day, the second day, they sort of didn't realize what was going on, and they told me, so what should we do? We are not understanding anything about what is being said on the set. So I said, well, basically, you know, I just ask you to concentrate on your art, on your profession, whether you are the cinematographer, the sound technician, the whatever, the first assistant director. That was very frustrating for her because, you know, she's the assistant director and she couldn't understand anything, or the acting coach, etc. So it was my job basically to keep focus, to keep them, all the actors focus, them and the technicians to be focused on their work, on their job completely, you know, and trust what I was doing basically. And as far as the actors, especially Lei, she's her name in Spanish is Bella, which means beautiful. And she's very smart, like I said. So she gave me a lot of points, we exchanged a lot of ideas. Although the script was already translated into Mandarin, you know, the written Mandarin long time ago, we start talking about ways of expressing things, colloquial things. Because when I was living in China almost 20 years ago, there were many things that you would say in a different way. 15 years later, you know, China develops so fast, everything changes, customs, everything that they found that some of the things that I have written were, let's say, old by now, and they incorporated the new phrases, new ways that they thought they will express themselves nowadays, the Chinese. And also it's interesting because all of them, like I said, I mean, she's from Xi'an, he's from Taiwan. Chang is from Taiwan, and Wong is from the south, from Zhejiang, from the south of China, and Mr. Lu, which is also very interesting, a very nice character. He's from the northeast of China, in front of Japan. He's from Heilongjiang province. So imagine they're all from all over. So in order to find a common Mandarin, let's say, that it will be accent, everything will be understood, I had to rely on them, on their ideas. And then as far as the emotions, how the emotions will transpire, I took on my experience and how I saw that the Chinese express themselves, how they move, things that they will say or will not say, from what I remember, what it was good or bad for them, let's say, in that sense, what it was emotional, or how would they react to some emotions. And then Lei, again, Bella, she also suggested a lot of things, you know, like I said, she's quite bright, and she gave me a lot of points of how to handle some situations in today, you know, how it will be done today. So yes, so I did work closely with them, and again, perhaps Bella was the character that will ask more questions, will give out more ideas, will communicate more, and will work the character around her ideas and my ideas, basically. I think, you know, the first thing that I did with Asia was, after living there, I did a documentary series about the Silk Road, like 15 years ago. So I shot in Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, and China. It was a 10 episode documentary series. And then after doing Emptiness, basically, I think for now, for the time being, I'm not looking into continue that relationship or the topic. The relationship, yes, of course, as a person, yes, but I don't know if in film I will continue doing something with China specifically. My next film basically is a different story. Is a story about, is based on a novel, a very well novel called Talking to Ourselves. It's by this very well-known, very famous writer called Andres Neumann. He's from Argentina and Spain. And this novel has won many awards. And it's a novel about the family and the breaking down of a family when they're looking at the terminal illness of the father. That's my next film. So it's a completely different story. It's a story about the struggle, death, love in a way, and a crisis that comes around a woman around the death of her husband. And this is going to be shot at the end of this year in Ecuador and Peru. It's a co-production with Peru and Ecuador in the north of Peru. and the south of Ecuador. And that's my next film. And then after that, again, I take on another completely different subject that has to do with some dark story here in Ecuador, some political, social issue here in Ecuador. But again, something that the films that I tried to do and everything that I done in my career as a whether as a producer or director always has had something to do with world issues, with emotions that always can be related in many parts of the world, and I will continue doing that. So definitely, the films, the cinema that I make has to do with deep social issues, political issues, etc. So I will continue on that journey, to explore things that people around the world can relate, basically. Yes, well, thank you for the interview, for the time. I'm very excited to show my film in Asia. It was a film certainly about a Chinese community, an Asian community in Latin America from a different perspective, from a Western perspective, basically. And the film began its journey in Korea, and now it's in Osaka. For me, I'm very proud to be part of it. I think again, like you said, it's a different perspective, that people have not seen before and didn't understand or know that. For example, there are Chinese communities in Latin America or other parts of the world. So I'm very excited, and I wish all the Osaka audience, to enjoy the film. So this is an emotional journey that I think we go through all these emotions that we can all relate in life, whether you're an immigrant or whether when you're just sitting at home, but you always go home through nostalgia, through disillusion, through anger, and through emptiness. Nowadays we're living in a time that the future is very uncertain for about the audience. Stay with that feeling. Unfortunately, is a emptiness feeling, but it is what the film portrays, and I hope you really enjoy it. I really enjoy and recommend it. For people to watch it, and hopefully I'll see you sometime in Japan. I would love to be there at some point with one film. And thank you for the time.